Hello, I'm Will.
Hi, and I'm Renat, and we are planning to make a series of videos discussing interesting topics, and we decided to start with the topic of racism. Will?
That's right. So I thought first we'd go into the definition of racism as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. So that seems pretty straightforward, but it also uses a lot of obfuscated words. There's like 6 different words that are interchangeable. I have no problem with the definition at the moment, but that's why we're here to discuss. Renat, what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a good definition to start with. I would do some modification, though. I would say that putting prejudice, antagonism, and discrimination in like 3 big words. Out of these 3, I'm happy with discrimination because it's an act. Prejudice and antagonism, to me, they sound like feelings or thoughts or opinions. These are inner emotions that people have, and therefore they are not observable. And therefore, for clarity, I think that let's put them aside and think of racism, at least for the time being, as an act. So there must be an act of discrimination based on either race or ethnicity. And these 2 terms we can discuss what's the difference, what does it mean later. But other than that, things are good. So maybe we should start talking about different beliefs people have about racism. Will?
That makes sense. Well, let's say the prime minister calls a group of people racist or Nazis because he sees a Nazi flag in the media. That Nazi flag in the crowd could represent something else, but at the same time, the group of people see a flag and therefore it's conflated with the group. That is, in a sense, the thought process, the antagonism of another group. By showing support, by having this flag, that means you're being racist. So that's the aspect where people come from the thought perspective, right? Also, as well, the Nazi establishment being, pretty straightforward with their imagery. They were the first ones to have propaganda. I don't believe that they were, the only reason they were in power was because of their racist beliefs. But through their system, they were able to propagate, and now we have a standard for what is racism. Go ahead, Renat.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll make one step back from what you've said, which is interesting about Nazi Germany and stuff. And let's talk a bit about what race is. And I would say that race is something that people, anthropologists have a good take on racism. Anthropologists are people who study human past mostly and present, but very much they study past. And what they do is they measure human skulls, and they're just different sizes. And they say that in order to define race, you need to have morphological differences. So there must be some measurable difference. That's one. Another thing is they can only define race for a population. That is not for a single person. Single person does not have a race. Race is a collective idea. So you have a group of people, you can say, if this group is different from other group, you can say these 2 groups belong to different races. If you have 2 individuals that are different, you cannot say anything about them. So race is this interesting collective thing. Now, plus there must be physical difference. Now, it's not just the skin color, there has to be difference in their bones, basic, in order to be significant enough in the structure of a skull to be classified as different races. Now, from that perspective, if we look at Nazi Germany, I would have to conclude that Nazi Germany was not a racist state. Now, that is not to say Nazi Germany was a friendly state. It was a aggressive expansionist state which discriminated against people. It discriminated against groups, Jews, gypsies, communists, homosexuals, certain religious groups, yes. But this discrimination was not fundamentally based on the shape of their skull, but rather on a, I would say, cultural thing. So the idea of a Jew, as used by Nazi Germany, referred to a culture of a person, not even religion, because there were certain Jews that were not religious. So they were only Jews in the sense that their great-grandfather was going to synagogue and their friends were from that background, and that's how they were labeled Jews. So that's a cultural discrimination, predominant, and not racist. So it's might be a small but important distinction from my perspective. And tell me what you think, Will.
Well, I guess we're going into what classifies racism. But some people believe that racism can be directed at minorities, and minorities are also people's beliefs. And I don't see how religion is a minority when it is so prevalent, but at the same time, it's not right that people get discriminated against just because they have a different belief than other people. So if I had a cross or a Star of David, my opinion is different to other people just based on that, by seeing a different iconography. So is that racist by having a different view on a culture, or is it specifically bone structure, skin color, and like preferences for that kind of culture, like your own culture precedes your another culture? Go ahead.
Well, I think that in order to have a clarity in the conversation, just in general, as we humans engage with each other, we need to stick to some at least basic definitions. And racism implies difference in race. That means that one group must be physically different, their bones must be different. If they have different religion, but they are not belong to distinct races, like two populations, then whatever negative relations they have, whatever type of discrimination they engage in, that should not be classified as racism. It's some other form of discrimination. That's otherwise, if we don't use that approach, terms will get confused very quickly. And that is, I believe, what is often happening in our society. So I'm sticking with a strict definition.
So
Well,
racial group makes sense for bone structure, but what about ethnic group?
right, that's a good question. Ethnic groups, that's more of a people who come from a particular, say, country, because usually within a country you have, especially in the past, before modern travel, countries were relatively isolated. And you were culturally isolated, relatively, so you were familiar with your customs, so ethnicity is a combination of culture, and sometimes there could be, one can think of ethnicity that's related to race, in a sense that people living in Japan have a distinct look from people living in Canadian North, Inuit, who have distinct look from people living in Ethiopia. However, ethnicity is it's mostly, I would say, related to citizenship, to culture, and not so much to the physiological differences between people. So it's more cultural thing or political thing. Cool.
Culture and politics both go into religion, because they're both belief systems. And I come from a background of a very open idea systems, very open exchange of ideas. So I don't believe certain things should be lied about. You don't have to explain everything, but certain lies do hurt the system. So when we have people who, let's say, have luxuries, or the Borgia, who give away sins, that makes the whole system corrupt. We have that now with lobbyists in our system. That makes it the whole system just a money scheme to keep feeding into these systems. The racism doesn't feed into this at all, but it is a system that we put an overbearing throw blanket on that just keeps us from looking at these systems that are subjugating us. So we have this feeling that we should always be proper, that we should always like not have racist thoughts and police ourselves. When there is no need, we're not racist. We just need to express ourselves more openly. When we tell the truth, we realize the system is lying to us. Renat?
Yeah, Will, it's interesting when you mention different thoughts. I personally think that freedom of speech and freedom of thought, these are very important things. And I have no problem with people thinking anything at all. They can think of, I don't know, swallowing entire earth and leaving nothing. It doesn't bother me at all. The problems we experience when people act, and thinking and acting, these are different things. So specifically about racism, if we describe racism as act, discrimination based on this racial or ethnical, racism, I believe, hardly even exists as per definition, because usually when people discriminate, they discriminate based on things that they discriminate based on things that they dislike, and they generally dislike the behavior of other people and not the shape of their faces. That is way less relevant. Now, when it comes to behavior, though, there are some behaviors that are like some behaviors that people say resent, such as, I don't know, murder. It's universal among humans and cultures. There are some behaviors that may be present in some cultures and not in the other cultures. And if people dislike these behaviors, that would not constitute racism, because people who disagree with that behavior are still fine with people from that background as long as they don't engage in that particular behavior. So racism, in a sense of hatred towards the group of people, irrespective of their behavior, is something that it may exist, but personally, I haven't really seen and haven't heard of anybody who's seen that kind of racist. Will?
I believe there are experiences everyone has where their race or culture was subjugated or brought up as a point of ridicule. And those people can say, I have experienced those experiences as well, where I can say, that feels racist. These people making a predisposition judgment on me based on something is racist. They know something about me, therefore they're insulting that part of me. That feels racist. So that's an attack by their verbal response. And obviously that's different from just thinking it and then the action of speaking it. The same way someone doesn't think about the Nazi flag at the rally, but they just bring the Nazi flag at the rally. There is a different connotation. There are certain ways people can take it. You can either believe that they were angry at the moment and needed something to pick out to hurt you, and that was the most easy representation to hurt you, your culture, your ethnicity, your religion, or they chose to attack you. Maybe that was a lynching, maybe it was a hate crime. I don't even know about the definitions of those, but maybe they didn't say anything. They just don't associate with you anymore. Maybe it's different, but these are different aspects of how we can be honest with ourselves, how we perceive different actions of people. And when they swear, when they use profanities, when they use racist slurs, they're trying to get across a point. And honesty sometimes hurts in those instances. Renat.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that when people say stuff that leads to somebody else label them as racist, it's usually some conflict between people that has nothing to do with the race itself. People try to say anything that would trigger emotions on the other person, and there is no such thing as, again, racist thoughts, really, because again, racism has to be an act, and people can, if people are judgmental, that's fine. I mean, we are judgmental. I mean, that's part of being human. We have thoughts. Our thoughts could be wrong about anything. Doesn't matter whether they are based on race or not based on race. Thoughts are wrong, that's normal. It's most people, when they have thoughts, they understand that whatever their thoughts are, they can be mistaken. So everything here is fine. When things become not fine is when we say, okay, a group of people with a certain size of head will have to work for half the pay. Now, if that was happening, that would be clearly racist under this description. But this is something that's not happening. So I don't think that racism as an issue really exists. So it's not to say that people don't get discriminated against. Yes, they do get discriminated. And yes, it can happen that people with a certain skin color get discriminated more often than others. Absolutely. However, that discrimination, in my opinion, is not fundamentally based on race. That is not based on the fact that person great-grandfather was born, say, in Africa or in China or wherever else, Germany, however, on some other factors. And some of these factors are poverty, for example. Poverty is a big one. People in our modern societies, and you and I, just to tell our viewers, we live in British Columbia, Canada, and in British Columbia, Canada, a person with any skin color, with any size of skull, with any religion, will get a great service if they're loaded with cash. And you could be of any background and look like an ancient Greek god. If you don't have money, good luck to you. So these factors are much more important. But when our leaders talk about race, it's almost they try to divert the attention from the actual genuine problems, poverty, homelessness, lack of medical care, these people are suffering from, and to make us feel divided among ourselves. Like if our skin color somehow makes a big difference, it makes us feel different over there, which is false. It's just not what's happening. And if people paid enough attention to themselves, to how they feel, they'll see it. I mean, hunger is unmistakable. Everybody can understand what hunger feels like. So that's the problem. Hunger, we don't have enough food, for example, not the size of someone's skull. That nobody cares about it, usually. Will?
Those are good points. And it comes into the preference or racism. Just because you have a preference for a certain type of person, is that racist? By thinking I want something specific and not including everything, does that make you racist? In certain cases, maybe because you're propagating an idea that harms others. I'll give an example. The KKK promoting lynching of Black people. I haven't seen it, heard it, witnessed it lately, but that is just an idea that is in the mindset, probably from Jerry Springer or historical incidents. But because that is one idea, we should avoid that idea to lynch Black people based on their skin color. So that idea is racist in that sense. Renat?
Well, again, I can understand that some people may relate to an idea as being racist. Personally, I don't look at it this way. I myself don't view the problem with Nazi Germany as a bunch of ideas that some people are special. that idea have been around for as long as humans been. I mean, if we go back to ancient Greece, who created this pantheon of gods who were, and they even had this idea of heroes. These are half gods, half humans, and the idea of that kings have blue blood and they're special. We had these ideas all along. I mean, there's nothing. Every person who, like most people who are in a relationship, tell their significant other that that significant other is a special person, that they're not just regular. So that idea itself is not a problem. I mean, we had this idea. The thing is, what you're going to do if you think your spouse is this very special person, and because of that you take a shotgun and kill others, that's one thing. If you think that she's a special person, you buy her flowers, but that's a different thing. So it's not the idea itself, but it's what people actually do, and what people do has less to do with ideas as they are in the abstract sense. It has more to do with people use ideas to justify their actions, not the other way around. People want to kill somebody, they kill and they accuse whoever they killed as being heretic. At the same time, a person can love somebody and say, well, I love them because my religion teaches love. It's people refer to exactly the same religion, but they use it to describe completely different outcomes. So racism as an idea is not a problem. It's a belief that let's say we believe that some people are smarter, stronger. It's a belief. We could be correct, we could be wrong about it. That idea itself does not hurt them. If you, for example, for whatever reason, was to start feel that you're 10 times smarter or prettier, and that's because of your genetics, because you created like that, that doesn't bother me at all. Now, if you try to kill me, that would. So I think it's important to distinguish between having different ideas, even if they are wrong ideas, even we disagree, versus things that actually hurt. The problem with poverty is not that idea of poverty. The problem with poverty is if you're poor, you don't eat. If you don't eat, you die. And these are actual physical things that hunger is you can experience. That's if doctors can analyze your body and say that yes, you went through hunger, that they can see in your metabolic rates. They cannot look at you and say that yes, we know that you've been racismized. If you can, they can say somebody beated you up, but they cannot determine whether it was because they were racist or they just hated you. So racism, in that sense, it's more of an artificial creation. It's this idea of that we have to fight this monster racism, and that's important, distracts us from actually looking at the core issue. It reminds me of a witch hunt, when there were people thinking that there are witches and it's important to fight them, and they were spending a great amount of energy fighting them, and anybody who doubted the existence of witches would be thought of as an idiot. And the bottom line is we now know that witches don't even exist. So people were convinced that they do exist, and everything they saw around them only proved it. But again, that's simply because they deluded themselves. I think we are deluding ourselves with racism, and our governments and our elites are interested in that, because for as long as we fight this invisible enemy, we're not going to look at what they're actually doing. We're not going to look at how they abuse us. Those who have power abuse those who are weak. So it's based on power differential, and in capitalist society, very much has to do with money and economic wealth. Well,
I think that's very true. And they use these kinds of politics to make sure that we vote for the right side by pretending that we're just by voting for that side. I don't believe that any of our politicians were in power because they were the people's choice at the time, because they believe the same things as the people, but more that they represent what the people want. And those ideas aren't followed through. They're just ideas that are in the nether that they can point to and say, I will fix this, but in eventuality, it never gets fixed. And then the next representative can always say, I will fix this. Meanwhile, certain systems are in place that remove and change that are always in benefit to certain people's interests. I can give examples about this Russian-Ukraine example of all the sanctions. The sanctions are just an excuse to raise prices again. Meanwhile, the COVID aspect of it was strenuous on the systems. Many people decided to change their career paths And now we have different people working for different positions who need to do these jobs to facilitate it. And in a sense, we don't have enough people doing that job for the pay. So prices go up, everything goes up because we have to regulate, change, move towards different aspects of our culture. Money is subjective as well. If we don't buy something, it will go down in price. If we want something a lot, it will go up in price no matter what. So it's just inevitable. I can show that the people who are in power use the fact of race to benefit them, shutting down the opponent by saying the opponent is racist and then bringing up something that is non-secular. Their preference towards hiring someone, or the idea that if they didn't hire a female for this position, or not enough Muslims in this particular group, yet we just had a great crusade in the 2000s against Muslims because of 9/11. It's all very strange to me. Go ahead, Renat.
Yeah, I think these are very interesting points you're raising. And I also think that we just raised this topic, which is rarely gets openly discussed, the topic of racism and how does it connect with other stuff and with other issues, and what do we think about it. But I'm quite interested in knowing what other people may think about it. So I think we're quite open to feedback, and I welcome all our viewers to let us know what they think, what they feel, and we'll read through it, and we'll respond to anything that's interesting, and feel free to suggest, and we're all ears. Will?
Thank you so much for being here, Renat, and I hope our viewers enjoy this. We're open to all viewpoints and so grateful that everyone could watch. We're going to end the video now. Thank you so much, everyone.